My name is Andrew Keller. I'm 36 years old, a logistics officer in the United States Army, and a single father to a 9-year-old boy named Jacob. Most days, my job is about supply chains, convoy routes, and fuel calculations, not moral decisions that split your life in two. That morning, we were wrapping up a routine supply drop near the outskirts of Aleppo. Dust clung to everything. The heat shimmered off the ground like a warning. As we prepared to head back to base, a Syrian interpreter I trusted pulled me aside. His voice shook when he told me a village 10 miles east was in the path of a scheduled bombing run, something no one had mentioned in our briefings. Women, children, dozens of them. They had no way out. I checked with command. No reply, just radio silence. I called again, this time with urgency in my voice. Still nothing. That silence wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. I stood there, staring at the line of supply trucks behind me. Empty now, parked and idle, designed to move food and gear, not people. But the wheels still turned the same. One of my sergeants walked over. He'd been with me long enough to know when something was wrong. I told him what I knew. He didn't say much, just looked me in the eye and said, "Are you sure you want to do this? You know what it means. Career suicide." I nodded. We didn't ask permission. We didn't wait. We rolled out. By the time we reached the village, I could already hear the sound of distant artillery echoing from the hills. There was no panic yet, just confusion. Parents clutching kids, elders standing in doorways. We had to move fast. No time to explain protocol. We loaded who we could. I kept count in my head: 34 souls packed into 2 trucks and a modified med transport. I kept thinking, this is the right thing. This is why we wear the uniform. Not to watch innocent people burn in the crossfire of someone else's agenda. We got them out with 20 minutes to spare. I'll never forget the look on one woman's face. She held a baby against her chest, her eyes locked on mine, silently mouthing what I knew had to be thank you. I drove the final truck myself back to the base. It was quiet in the cab. My hands trembled just enough to notice. I was exhausted, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to pride. We did something that mattered. When I stepped off the vehicle, I was met by a junior officer. He handed me a printed email without a word. I opened it right there on the tarmac. Subject line: official notification of review for unauthorized actions. My gut dropped. I read it twice, hoping it would change. They knew. Someone had seen the convoy. Maybe a drone feed, maybe a report from another unit. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd acted without orders, used government vehicles outside mission scope, and compromised operational control. That's what they saw. To them, I wasn't a soldier who saved lives. I was a liability. I didn't have time to process it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my mother calling from home. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Jacob collapsed," she said. "He had a seizure. Ambulance is on the way." I could hear sirens in the background. My legs went numb. I leaned against the truck, the email still in my hand. I tried to call his doctor, but the call wouldn't connect. The network was overloaded, or maybe I was just shaking too much to dial. I looked around the base, this place that now felt less like safety and more like a cage. I wasn't even sure if I'd be allowed to leave. The relief I'd felt minutes ago had vanished, replaced by a cold flood of fear, for my son, for my job, for everything. That moment broke something in me. I had risked my career to save strangers, believing the system would understand. But the system doesn't feel. It only reacts. And now my boy needed me more than ever. And I was trapped. The order never came. Not to move, not to warn, nothing. Just silence from higher up, as if they didn't hear the panic coming from that village 10 miles east. But we heard. We knew what it meant when radio traffic goes dark before a strike. It meant someone had decided those people didn't matter. The interpreter who flagged me down looked like he'd seen a ghost. He said, the airstrike was scheduled within the hour. He begged me to do something. I wanted to believe there'd been a mistake. Maybe it was a mix-up in coordinates or timing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. We'd seen it before. Civilian targets justified on paper. Lives turned into acceptable losses for the sake of the mission. I stood staring at the convoy, a line of tan trucks loaded with nothing but extra fuel and crates of MREs, tools of my job, logistics, supply chains. My world was inventory sheets and shipping orders, not field evacuations or hero moments. But those trucks could move people. Fast. Far. One of my sergeants approached. He'd caught the tone of the conversation. "You're thinking about doing it, aren't you?" I didn't answer. He looked around, then said softly, "This is career suicide." I knew he was right. I radioed command one last time. No reply. The clock was ticking. I looked back toward the horizon. The sun was lower now, orange and sharp, like it knew something we didn't. I took a breath, told my team to prep the trucks, strip excess gear, clear space. This isn't a supply run anymore. They didn't cheer. No one smiled. They just moved. A few looked at me like they weren't sure if I'd gone mad. But they followed. That was enough. The road was narrow, barely a road at all. Dust rose behind us, clinging to everything like guilt. The closer we got to the village, the heavier the silence became. Then we saw them, families huddled near broken walls, children clutching bags too big for their hands, no weapons, no threat, just people caught in a storm they didn't start. I stepped out first. Some of them backed away, unsure if we were friend or foe. I raised my hands, kept my voice low. "We're here to help. Get in." Now, they moved fast once they realized we weren't there to hurt them. 34 people, packed tight into 3 vehicles. I kept count not for the records but because I needed to hold on to something real. A little girl crawled into the back of my truck, her shoes missing, a scrape on her knee. She looked up at me with eyes too old for her face. I nodded to her, like I was promising something I couldn't say out loud. We turned around and drove. No sirens, no lights. Just the sound of tires over dirt and the occasional cough from the back. I drove like hell. Every minute felt like a challenge to the sky. Not yet. Just give us a little more time. When we crossed the checkpoint, no one stopped us. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they did and chose not to see. Either way, we made it. I parked the last truck and looked back. My passengers were quiet, stunned, some crying. But they were alive. I knew what I'd done. Knew what it would look like on paper. Unauthorized use of government property. Disregard for command structure. Maybe worse. But as I stood there, watching a father lift his son out of the truck, I felt no regret. I hadn't disobeyed to be noble. I did it because I could. Because no one else was going to. Because sometimes the uniform means more than orders. It means doing what's right, even when no one's watching. Even if it costs you everything. I barely had time to catch my breath before the reprimand came. I hadn't even stepped out of my gear when the base commander pulled me aside and said I was officially under review. No thanks, no questions, just a tight voice telling me I was confined to base until further notice. I tried to argue, said the mission saved lives. He didn't look up from the paper he handed me, just said that wasn't my call to make and walked away. My hands were still shaking when my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Her voice cracked the second I picked up. Jacob had collapsed at school. Seizures. They called an ambulance. He was at the hospital and asking for me. The room spun. I told her I'd get there as fast as I could. Then I ran straight to the duty office and asked for emergency leave. The clerk checked my file, looked up, and shook his head. Disciplinary status. Not eligible. I asked again, louder. Said it was my son, 9 years old, in a hospital bed alone. He didn't even blink, just repeated the rule like it was holy scripture. I stood there, frozen, couldn't yell, couldn't move, just held the paper in my hand like it might burn its way out. I just risked my career to save strangers, and now I couldn't even hold my own son's hand. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, a crack in something I thought was solid. That was the moment I knew this system, this uniform, It didn't always protect the right people. Sometimes it punished them for trying. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, but in the way no one looked at me. 3 officers sat behind a long table, expressionless, flanked by flags and a wall clock ticking like a warning. I stood alone, no lawyer, just a duty representative who barely glanced at me between his notes. The charges came in quick bursts. Egregious insubordination, misuse of government property, disregard for the chain of command. They said I had jeopardized operational security by diverting military vehicles from their assigned use. They said I had created a dangerous precedent that could encourage future unauthorized actions. They said I had placed personal moral judgment above military order. I asked to call witnesses, the civilians we evacuated, families that were still alive because of what we did. The judge shook his head. Not recognized as reliable. No legal standing. I swallowed hard and kept my mouth shut. Not because I agreed, but because I knew anger wouldn't help. They weren't looking for context, they wanted compliance. The officer to the left, a colonel, read from my service record. He mentioned commendations, deployments, leadership scores. Then he folded the paper and said none of it excused my actions. That I had betrayed the trust of the system. I almost laughed. Betrayed? I didn't steal intel. I didn't sell secrets. I got women and children out of a blast zone using the only tools I had. But they didn't see that. Or maybe they did and chose not to. Easier to punish than to reconsider the rules. When they adjourned, I was told a final decision would come in writing. Until then, I was confined to quarters. No contact with media. No further statements. They dismissed me like I was a problem that needed to be contained. As I walked out, I felt the weight settle deeper in my chest. Not because I regretted what I'd done. I didn't. But because the people in that room had more power than truth ever would. It started with a knock on my door at 6 a.m. One of the younger guys from our unit, barely 20, stood there with his hands shoved in his pockets, eyes darting. He didn't say much, just that something was happening online and I needed to see it. He handed me his phone and hit play. The screen filled with footage from our mission. Civilians climbing into trucks, kids clinging to mothers. The sky behind them red with fire. My voice giving calm, direct orders. Then the sound of jets in the distance. He said he recorded it for personal reasons, never meant to leak it. But his girlfriend had seen it, thought people needed to know. She uploaded it without telling him. Within hours, it was everywhere. I watched the views climb by the thousands. Comments flooding in, people asking why the army was punishing someone for saving lives. Reporters picked it up, analysts started debating it on air. Then a senator tweeted the clip with 6 words that stopped everything. We punish saving lives? Suddenly, the silence cracked. Calls came in. Journalists requesting interviews. Advocacy groups demanding answers. My name, which had been buried in accusations, was now headline material. The army didn't react at first. They tried to downplay it, called the video incomplete, taken out of context. But that didn't work. The images spoke louder than any briefing ever could. When I saw that senator on TV, standing at a podium, quoting my case, I felt something shift. She wasn't angry. She was calm. But her words cut deep. She asked what kind of military we were building, where honor meant punishment and silence kept the gears turning. I didn't leak the video. I didn't plan this. But now, for the first time, the truth wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who saw it and refused to look away. The call came 3 days after the video went viral. I was told to appear before a congressional oversight committee, not as a defendant this time, but as a witness. I sat in the back of a town car in full dress uniform, hands clenched, heart steady. Walking into that hearing room felt like stepping into a different world. Suits, cameras, polished wood, but the tension was familiar. Except now I wasn't being accused. I was being asked to explain. They let me speak without interruption. I told them what happened, what I saw, why I made the call. I didn't apologize. And I didn't attack. I just told the truth and let it sit where it landed. Some of the lawmakers nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. But the public was watching, and that changed everything. When I stepped outside, the crowd wasn't angry. They were clapping. By the end of the week, the Army issued a statement. They were launching a full internal review of my case and similar disciplinary procedures. The charges were dropped. My record cleared. Just like that, 6 months of isolation flipped into one line, reinstated with full honors. But I didn't go back to my unit. Instead, I was offered something else, a civilian advisory post at the Pentagon, ethics and field operations. They said I could help rethink the rules I once broke. It wasn't a reward. It felt more like a pivot, an invitation to help patch the cracks I'd fallen through. I took it. The office was quiet. No boots, no barking orders, just long tables, whiteboards, and people willing to listen. I helped design new scenario protocols, real-world judgment calls. We worked on guidance for commanders who might one day face what I did. It wasn't easy. Bureaucracy moved slow, and not everyone agreed with me. But I wasn't trying to win arguments. I was trying to leave things better than I found them. One afternoon, I saw my name on a briefing slide, not as a case study, as a reference point for positive field discretion. It hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't a redemption arc. It was a reckoning, a reminder that systems are built by people, and people can change them, but only if they stay in the fight long enough to matter. I didn't feel like a hero. Still don't. I just did what needed doing when no one else would. The fact that someone finally said that out loud in a place that mattered was enough. Justice wasn't handed to me. It was wrestled, piece by piece, out of silence and into daylight. And now, maybe, there's room for others to do the same. The house was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just been gone too long. The air smelled like old cereal and laundry detergent, and it was the best thing I'd breathed in months. Jacob was curled up on the couch under a blanket with cartoon sharks on it. His hair was longer, eyes a little thinner, like he'd seen more than a kid should. He looked up when I walked in, then just smiled and said hi like I'd only been gone a day. I sat next to him, careful not to say too much too fast. We talked about his school, his favorite YouTube videos, the dog next door that won't stop barking. Then he went quiet for a minute and asked the question, "Are you a hero now?" I stared at the TV screen for a second, even though it was just showing commercials. I thought about all the days in that hearing room, the video, the noise, the praise, the silence that followed. I thought about how none of it had felt like hero work, just a choice made in a moment that wouldn't let me do anything else. I looked at him and said, "Only if being a hero means choosing people over orders." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did, or maybe he just liked the sound of the answer. Either way, he leaned into my side and didn't say another word. The world didn't change overnight. There are still rules that need fixing and people still afraid to break them. But sitting there with Jacob's head resting against my arm, I felt something close to peace. Not because everything turned out perfect. It didn't. But because in the end, I didn't lose who I was to the uniform. And I didn't lose my son,